Top 3 developers in your book.
Ayala, Rockwell, Robinsons.
Pampanga in one word.
Delicious.
New Valley in one word.
Competitive.
Lights on or lights off.
Well, we need to keep lights on for the Philippine property.
What a way.
What a way.
Biggest opportunity today.
Biggest opportunity outside of Metro Manila.
Okay. Welcome everyone. This podcast was born out of a simple idea. Real estate is never just about property. It's about people. It's about how we live, where we live, and the decisions we make that shape our lives over time. And perhaps one of the most interesting things about this conversation is that it comes from two different generations. I'm Realtor Mike Tan. I've spent years studying communities, suburban living, estate development, and the transformation happening across the South.
And I'm Carlos. While my dad and I share the same passion for real estate, we often see the world through different lenses. Grew up in Quezon City and spent my formative years in Nuvali. And today, experience life as a young professional living in a condominium in Makati. Because of that journey, I've experienced firsthand how different environments can shape our priorities, lifestyles, and even the way we think about success, convenience, community, and quality of life.
Together, we explore the intersection of real estate, economics, lifestyle, purpose, and long-term thinking. Not to tell people what to buy, not to predict the future with certainty, but to help people think more deeply about where they want to build their lives and position themselves for the future. Today, we're tackling a topic that seems to dominate headlines, conversations, and social media. Is Philippine real estate in trouble? Or are we simply experiencing another chapter in a cycle we've seen before? What concerns are real? What concerns are exaggerated? What lessons have we learned from the previous downturns and crises? And perhaps more importantly, how do we separate fear from facts?
Because if history has taught us anything, it's that periods of uncertainty often create two very different reactions. Some people freeze, some people panic, and some people take a step back, study what's actually happening, and begin preparing for what comes next. Today's conversation isn't about hype. It's not about blind optimism. And it's certainly not about pretending challenges do not exist. It is about understanding the landscape clearly enough to make better decisions.
And joining us today is someone uniquely qualified to help us do exactly that. Through the years of studying markets, cities, infrastructure, demographics, and the way Filipinos live, he has become one of the country's most respected voices in real estate research and analysis. Please welcome Joey Roi Bondoc, Research Director of Colliers Philippines. Joey, welcome to the podcast. Before we jump into today's discussion, for those who may know your name,
Yes.
have encountered you from news, interviews, market reports, and presentations, etc., etc., etc. Alam mo naman, you're all over the place. Can you briefly share your journey in real estate?
In real estate, I joined Colliers in 2016. So this year, celebrating my 10th year with Colliers already. So a decade with Colliers. Just to share, I didn't have solid real estate background prior to joining Colliers. Prior to joining Colliers, I was with a think tank. So I would do macroeconomic research, even infrastructure research. And I joined Colliers in 2016. So that's when I finally got exposed to micro real estate research. I know real estate before, but on a more macro level. When I joined Colliers, of course, I got exposed to all these office developments, residential projects, even malls, hotels, and industrial parks, of course, because the real estate segment in the Philippines is pretty wide. It is pretty comprehensive, and it essentially covers these five property subsegments.
Laki nung
Yes.
ano, from
So
macro to micro.
exactly. So that's when I started doing macro real estate down to more micro
Mhm.
real estate research.
Mhm, mhm. Thank you, Joey. No,
Yeah.
let's go to the meat of the matter. No? If someone watched the
Yes.
news, social media, and property forums today, they might think Philippine real estate is in serious trouble, di ba?
Yes. Yes.
What is actually happening?
It has become my advocacy, maybe, to really enlighten the public. That's why, I accept a lot of speaking engagements, such as this one.
Mm,
And Carlos knows that,
mm,
whenever I'm invited by developers and even real estate groups, brokerage groups, I always say yes it if my schedule permits. So, how's the real estate right now? Well, we can't deny the fact that the Philippine property market is experiencing some challenges. And you probably know one of the major reasons behind this, the POGO Exodus.
mhm,
So, just to give a quick recap, when you look at the office sector, Mike, 2017 to 2019, that was a very good year
mhm.
for the office sector in Metro Manila. Why? Because the POGOs were here and they were really driving office lease rates. I remember at that time, vacancy across Metro Manila, 5-6%. Very low. If you look at Makati, CBD, the vacancy is less than 1%. I even know of a certain building in Makati CBD. When you want to occupy an office space, you have to pay a non-refundable deposit just for you to be able to review and scrutinize the lease contract.
Wow, just to review and release
Exactly.
contract.
That was how difficult it was at that time to lease out office space. I know that some tenants, well, the POGOs especially, were even paying in cash.
Mm-mm. Yeah,
And
yeah.
at the time, and I always say this, my colleagues in the office leasing made the killing in terms of office leasing because imagine in a single transaction, they would close how much? 10,000,
Mm,
20,000 square meters of office space.
mm,
So just imagine the
yeah,
commission
yeah.
that they would be getting, right,
Mm,
from closing those deals. But of course, the POGOs have essentially left the Philippines. President Marcos
mm,
even announced that during his 2024 State of the Nation address. And that has really left a huge void in the office market. Imagine previously the vacancy in Metro Manila office was 5-6%. Right now, the vacancy is still at about 17%,
mm,
19%. So it's still below
mm,
20%. But again, the question is, will we see vacancy still, below 20%, or will we eventually see office vacancy spiking?
mm, mm.
Could even breach 20%. But a good indicator here, Mike and Carlos, is that the office leasing sector in the Philippines continues to be standing on a stable ground, I would say, because while a lot of companies have implemented work from home
Mm,
and rationalized office space, I know some companies, traditional companies, previously they were occupying 3 floors here in BGC. They reduced their office footprint to a single
mm,
floor.
mm.
So again, even if we see all these vacated office spaces, we see new supply being completed, the fact that we're still at about 19% vacancy, that's a very good
Medyo okay yan,
indicator.
no?
Exactly.
19%.
So I think, let me zoom in on the office sector. The vacancy is 19%, but if you look at certain business locations across Metro Manila,
Mm,
say the likes of Makati
mm.
CBD, Fort Bonifacio, where we are right now, Ortigas Center, the vacancies are about 9 to 11%. So
That's
that's
quite low, ah. Decent
exactly
lang yan.
right. But, some of your listeners would probably ask, what's driving the vacancy then? If those 3 business locations have vacancies below the industry average, 9 to 11%, then why do we have a vacancy of 19%? That's where the other sublocations come in.
Mm, mm,
I mean, the Bay Area,
mm,
Alabang, for
mm,
example, and even fringes of Makati,
mm.
where vacancies would range from 30 to more than 40%.
Wow.
Again, why? Because of the space
Mm,
vacated
mm,
by the POGOs. Imagine the Bay Area. That was a POGO hub before,
mm.
right? That's why developers really, got excited and
Yeah,
developed a
yeah.
lot of office buildings in the Bay Area. And, well, they made good money
Mm,
from the aggressive take up by these POGOs. But again, the POGOs leaving the Philippines has resulted in sizable amount of vacant office spaces in these three locations: Makati Fringe, Alabang, and of course, the Bay Area.
So Joey, would you say that this crisis or this oversupply is on a per area
That's
basis?
correct, Mike.
Mahirap ba i-lump sum,
Yes.
sorry, not lump sum, no,
Y-
lump together na,
Yes.
oy, the sky is falling, yung
Exactly.
condos are not a good investment.
Exactly.
Also
Yeah.
residential,
Yes.
residential where ano.
That's why we always say this. You don't have to look at it with a myopic stance. Because yes, a vacancy is 19%. But there are other sublocations, in fact, doing much better than, well, the other submarkets. Again, submarkets are doing well. Well, you have Makati CBD, Fort Bonifacio, Ortigas Center. In fact, I'll give you an example, Mike. In Makati CBD, Fort Bonifacio, in Ortigas Center, it's very difficult for a large company looking for, say, three vacant floors of office space to occupy those spaces. Why? They don't have the available vacant space. Three floors, contiguous office floors. Where we are right now in Fort Bonifacio, it's very difficult. Of course, you have the likes of Coca-Cola, Mead Johnson. Well, they were able to occupy massive office space because they were able to look for vacated office spaces or relatively new office buildings completed here. But that's not the case for the entire Fort Bonifacio. Again, a vacancy of about what? 10, 11%. It's very difficult to find contiguous office space at this point. So that is one of the major reasons why we see tempered vacancy in Fort Bonifacio. But again, as I discussed earlier, it's not the same situation when you go to the Bay Area, fringes of Makati, as well as Alabang. I would even say my C5 corridor is one thriving location. Of course, you're probably familiar with the C5 corridor, previously an industrial hub, right? Where you see a lot of warehousing, logistics facilities, and then developers acquired parcels of developable land. They essentially built master plan communities which offer office buildings as well as residential towers. So that's what we see in the C5 corridor, and it is recording very strong take-up from office tenants as well as residential buyers, investors at this point.
Joe, is it safe to say that medyo exaggerated yung news about the general real estate, that everything is bad
Yes.
in the real estate industry in the Philippines, di ba?
It's
Is it safe to say na exaggerated kasi bad news sells
yes,
di
exactly.
ba? Oh, with
Exactly.
everything.
Yeah, I agree because no matter how we try reframing the angle, if the reporter wants to put forth a controversial title just so they can do some clickbaiting or see a lot of likes and shares, reactions within their social media posts. The fact is, the Philippine property market at this point, especially when you look at those five segments, and I can discuss those in detail later, Mike. But again, office segment, I would say it is stabilizing because again, we're still at about what 19% vacancy. That's not bad. Again, there's some sublocations performing better than the other submarkets, and we believe that for the office sector, Mike, we always say this: global capability centers are in fact helping driving that demand. What are the global capability centers? So the services, for example, financial services, audit, healthcare information management, software engineering, those services are generated in the Philippines, and those are also being used by the subsidiaries of that global capability center. So the likes of JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, they continue to occupy office space here. They have been expanding, and I think that's a very good signal for the market. These are not just outsourcing companies, Mike. These are global capability centers generating services not just for their Philippine units, but even for their units outside of the country. And why is this a good signal? Because these global capability centers, the higher value outsourcing companies, are the types of companies that will be here for the long haul.
Mhm.
I know that you probably heard of some reporters citing that artificial intelligence will
Yeah.
affect the BPO
Oo,
sector
oo.
in the
Mawipe
Philippines.
out na daw yung ano.
Exactly. But what's very positive news that we have been seeing here is that no. In fact, these companies continue to occupy office space, not just in Metro Manila, Mike, but even in Cebu. Ernst& Young recently
Mm.
occupied office space in Cebu. Concentrix is one of the biggest outsourcing companies in the Philippines. And what do they do with AI? They, in fact, use artificial intelligence to complement their services and allow them to even expand operations, eventually hiring more Filipinos and taking up more office space. So we believe that these are the types of companies that are somehow shielded from the negative impacts
Mhm.
of artificial intelligence. So for the office segment, there are a lot of opportunities. While the vacancy in Metro Manila is 19%, the vacancy in Cebu is lower, 17%. When you go to Cebu IT Park, Cebu Business Park, vacancies are even lower than that, lower than the 17%. In Clark, Pampanga, about 17%. In fact, in Davao, Mike, could you believe the office vacancy is about 7%? So
Wow.
that's low.
Very low.
Only one submarket that has quite a bit of an elevation in terms of office vacancy, Iloilo.
Mhm.
Why? Because Iloilo saw substantial completion of new office space previously.
Yung
But now,
supply and demand issue lang, dumami
exactly.
lang ang
So
supply.
it's a cyclical environment, Mike, right? So
Mm.
of course, previously the vacancy in Iloilo was 6%. Of course, normally for developers, they would build more.
Mm.
And now vacancy is a bit elevated. Why? Because you have those buildings already completed, 2020, 2021. It's a matter of time before those office spaces are completed. And, you again attract all these outsourcing companies that are occupying massive office space.
Although Joey, we are not discounting the global
Of
slowdown, di
course, of
ba? But
course.
I think because of our young population, very high educated
Yes, yes.
population, there's so much space
That's
for
correct.
expansion,
But
di ba?
you mentioned
Oh.
that, Mike. That's an interesting take on this outsourcing sector. And I raised this in a previous interview, if I'm not mistaken, with ANC. Yes, the Philippines remains an attractive outsourcing destination, even for the higher value outsourcing services. But I think one key consideration for the Philippine government, especially the education department and the academe, right, the universities that produce all these graduates, there appears to be a declining functional literacy, Mike,
Wow.
in the
Wow.
Philippines. And this is something that, the Philippine government should really address
Wow.
because, I mean, we're talking about higher
Mhm,
value
mhm,
outsourcing
mhm,
services here,
mhm.
engineering,
Yeah.
software engineering, finance and accounting. And this will really, require high value skills, right? So how can you employ these people if they're not
Mm.
skilled? How can you attract these outsourcing companies, the global capability centers, to invest in the Philippines if we do not have the manpower required by these companies? We want to bite a greater
Yeah.
slice of this global capability center pie. But again, the challenge here is sustaining not just infrastructure, not just the quality office space, but of course, more importantly, the skilled manpower that we can supply these global capability centers and outsourcing companies that will, eventually invest in the Philippines.
What I'm hearing, Joe, is that speaking good English is not anymore
Oh,
I mean, it is an advantage,
yes,
but
yes.
now it transcends to much more than
Definitely.
that.
Yes, definitely, Mike. I'm talking about the skills here that are very technical:
Mhm.
software engineering, legal transcription, health information management, and other software related skills. And these really require, top notch skills. Perhaps a college graduate would help, but again, you
Mm,
need to
mm,
have a very good training outside of college. So that's, where the academe should
mm,
come in. There should be a good balance between what the quality of graduates that our universities produce, and the demand that these call centers, outsourcing companies will be requiring. What type of manpower will they be needing moving forward so that they can continue, sustain, or even expand their operations in the Philippines? That's a win-win for the real estate market, right? Because these companies will be needing more office space in the future.
But the groundwork, the basis is there, We have a young
Exactly.
population.
That's right. That's right.
Yung basic English
I
nga
would
na,
say we
di
have the
ba?
fundamentals,
Fundamentals, yes,
but
that's it.
we really need to upskill
Upskill.
this manpower
Mm.
that we have right now. I would even add, Mike, we need to differentiate because a lot of countries are really upgrading, not just with their English proficiency,
Mm.
but the technical
Mm.
know-how. I mean, I know some companies in the Philippines already operating here, and they even have, for example, the Latin American countries as options. And I know for a fact that the Philippines was able to edge out the South American countries. But for how long?
Yeah, yeah.
That's why we
Totally.
need to be proactive
Mm.
so that we continue to corner all these outsourcing companies
Mm.
that will be requiring office space in
Mm.
the future.
So paging Department of Education
That's
and
correct.
and TESDA
Not just
and all the
not
other
just DepEd or
agencies.
TESDA. Perhaps the DOST, for example, should really provide Department of Labor. Really seeing what's on the ground and what should be needed to enhance the quality of our current manpower.
So we don't want to get political here, but it
Exactly.
starts from
Yeah,
there.
that's right. That
From
is
from the
correct.
up
That is
up.
correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's a fervent call from a lot
Mm.
of stakeholders. That's why I would meet a lot of representatives of local information and communications technology councils. Those from Bataan, Iloilo, Davao, and even those from Central Luzon. It's really important that we gauge what the market requires and how can we further lift the quality of our graduates in the Philippines.
I think walang sikreto eh. We know
Yes,
what we need, 'di ba?
exactly.
It's a in implementation and
Exactly. That's
execution
right.
thing eh. No?
It's not a secret sauce.
Yeah.
It's actually laid out on the table, laid out for us for years already.
Mm.
We just need to comply with and implement.
Mm.
Yes, Sir Joey. So one thing I've realized is that many people in my generation have never really experienced a major economic crisis since being in Gen Z. So we've heard about them, we've read about them, but we've never really experienced it.
Yeah.
So when people say today's environment is difficult, what historical periods does it remind you of most?
Historical
Well,
tayo.
I think, when you ask me about historical figures and data, I feel like I'm carbon dating myself. But just a disclosure, I joined the labor force in 2006. So that's when I graduated at UP. So I joined the labor force immediately. And I think right now, just to mention this, Carlos, what we now have what we call the demographic sweet spot. What do I mean by that? We have again these graduates that are highly skilled, that are employable. They have all the necessary skills to be employed by the BPO sector, manufacturing sector, and other micro, small, and medium enterprises. In fact, I know that the virtual assistance segment in the Philippines is
Yeah.
growing.
Mhm.
So these are the virtual assistants handling payroll, handling payables of US-based companies. And they are paid handsomely, Carlos. Like 100,000 pesos, 150,000 pesos on a monthly basis. That's pretty huge, right? That's already executive level salary here in the Philippines. So hopefully, again, I mentioned this to Mike, we really need to upskill. And while we have the demographic sweet spot, we need to make sure that the current pool of high school and college students that we have right now are, well educated. They're exposed to the realities of the corporate world. Not just, the theoretical basics. That's why, at Colliers Philippines, we're in fact actively looking for interns. Because, when we hire interns, we want to make sure that they are really skilled and they have the proper knowledge that they will be needing. The soft skills, the technical skills. In fact, we train them highly in terms of doing presentations. That's what we do. I mean, I myself have done a lot of presentations, and you know that. So we want some technology transfer within Colliers Philippines, and that is important because when you join the labor force, in a corporate setting, this, Carlos, this, Mike, you do a lot of presentations.
Mhm.
You present in front of the board, you present in front of your boss, you present in front of a lot of brokers. So, you don't have time to panic, essentially. You really need to make sure that you do a very good presentation, impress the people that you are reporting to. But again, going back to that demographic sweet spot, we're enjoying that mainly because the average age of the Philippines is only 25.
25. Yeah.
So I'm not sure how young Carlos is,
I'm
but
25.
see, Carlos, you represent the average Filipino, 25 years old, has college degree, is healthy, is contributing to the Philippine economy, gainfully employed, contributing to the family. But what I want to stress here is the fact that is the future generation of graduates ready, to take on these corporate jobs, not just real estate jobs,
Yes.
not just outsourcing jobs. We now have a lot of freelance jobs that can be offered, and that can be taken assumed by these graduates. But do we have the manpower that will be able to handle those? There were some studies before, Mike and Carlos, saying that the future growth of the Philippines might be hampered by the lack of skills of our current pool of students. Of course, malnutrition is a factor. That's why these things should be addressed by the Philippine government.
Yes.
If you're malnourished, if you didn't take breakfast, how can you understand the lectures of your teacher or of your professor, right? So I think these things should be addressed because we want to really, of course, nurture and even develop a workforce that is skilled, that is talented, that is healthy, and that can take on all these corporate jobs, especially from the outsourcing sector, which, as I mentioned, has a direct impact on the real estate sector in the Philippines.
Sir Joey, I'd also like to add, how would you compare today's situation with the 1997
Okay.
crisis, financial crisis?
Although wala ka pa sa
Carlos,
workforce
when
nun, ah.
in late 90s, I was still a grade school student, grade schooler, but I think,
From
but
what
of
you've
course,
heard lang,
yes,
Joey, ah.
yeah, exactly. I think the Asian financial crisis, when you look at the property market in the Philippines, for example, at the time, we still have a much lower supply. And Mike, you probably know this. At the time, we only have what? Makati CBD or Tigas. I think Port Bonifacio
Was
was
being
still
auctioned din
exactly
yata.
at that time, right? By the
Mm.
MVP group. So it is still a relatively smaller market, Carlos, at the time, whether it's office or residential. That's why, if given that you have a limited supply, the impacts of Asian financial crisis were not as drastic compared to the adverse impacts of the global financial crisis. But what I want to highlight here is the fact that the Philippine property market is cyclical, meaning, of course, Philippine economy will be affected by any global health or economic crisis or regional crisis, as in the case of the Asian financial crisis or the global economic meltdown, global financial crisis of 2007, 2008. But the Philippine property market being cyclical in nature, once we see the Philippine economy rising, we also see Philippine property market improving in terms of lease rates, in terms of office occupancy, in terms of vacancy, in terms of prices. We saw that during the Asian financial crisis, global financial crisis, when the Philippine economy starts to improve, at the very least, prices would move sideways. They will not increase substantially, but there would be some form of improvement until the economy further stabilizes. And then we attract all these major companies to locate in the Philippines and invest in the Philippines. What I want to highlight here is that, of course, Asian financial crisis, my Carlos, that was 97, 98, right? And then there was also the dot-com bubble of 2001. So somehow also partly affected by
Nag-overlap
this.
yan.
Exactly.
Almost, ano.
But and I want to highlight this, mid-2000s, what did we see? That was the boom of the outsourcing sector. That was
Oh.
when we saw all these companies, Teleperformance, for example, investing here in the Philippines. That was a peak period, Mike and Carlos, for the outsourcing sector. Why? Because at the time, if I'm not mistaken, the outsourcing segment was growing by more than 10%.
Wow.
So imagine all these people being employed, right? In fact, Clark was a pioneer in the BPO sector. I remember at the time I had a professor that was working as a part-time call center agent at AOL.
Okay.
Imagine, Mike, di ba? Imagine
Hindi yata
Clark
niya alam yung
being,
AOL. Are
No,
you
no.
familiar
yeah,
AOL?
of
Hindi
course,
na.
Carlos is too young to know AOL. But imagine this, Mike, di ba? AOL in the Philippines. That was big, Carlos, at the time. And at the time, we were competing with India, for example, in terms of BPO services. But much of the expansion of the outsourcing sector at that time, mid 2000s, just before the global financial crisis, was happening here in Metro Manila. And that was, a period wherein developers really completed a lot of new office buildings, residential condominium towers, and then of course the Fort Bonifacio area, right? The Bonifacio Global City. But of course, as you know, the global financial crisis hit the Philippines. So the subprime crisis, Mike, that started in the United States, and then it affected the Philippine economy and, of course, property. I remember a lot of semiconductor companies at the time closing because of really dampened, stifled take up at that point. So that was a moment wherein we saw a momentary pause of the expansion of the BPO companies here in the Philippines. But after that, by 2010, that's when again we saw, a huge expansion, aggressive expansion of these outsourcing companies in the Philippines. 2010,
Boom
2011.
na yan, di ba? Boom
Exactly. In
years
fact, I
yan.
would even say that was a very good year for the Philippine economy and property. 2010, then up to about 2016. That was a period wherein we saw a lot of BPO companies investing heavily in the Philippines, and not just in Metro Manila, expanding outside. So Cebu, of course, was a major beneficiary of that expansion of these BPO companies. Bacolod, Iloilo, again, I mentioned already Pampanga. In fact, one mall in San Fernando was one of the major pioneers of housing, not just a mall, but also office spaces within that micro township. So that's what we saw. And then, of course, that was also a period, Carlos, just after the global financial crisis, when developers really became very aggressive in building micro townships. The relatively smaller master planned community. So you see them now in Metro Manila and even outside of the capital region. So that was a very good year, a very good period. And then, of course, 2016, you now see the POGOs. So the POGOs entering the Philippine property market, and similar to my explanation earlier, that's when we started to see a huge surge in property prices, office lease rates in Metro Manila and even outside of the capital region.
If I may backtrack lang on
Sure,
ano,
Mike.
a short anecdote lang on the 1997
Yes.
crisis, no. Yung residential properties were really affected, no.
That's correct.
At that time.
That was a period when Juan Rojas strangle.
Yeah, it was supposed to be a twin tower
Exactly.
thing, but so they paused it.
Exactly.
A personal experience naman, Carlos, tayo. Year 2000, yung second house, Ayala Ferndale, no? It was in Quezon City. So it was always been a dream of mine to have an Ayala property, to live in an Ayala village, no? Year 2000. 1998, we weren't living in an Ayala village, no? So they offered a very long term. Kasi nga, ang Ayala kasi, they don't lower the prices.
Yes.
but they have cash discounts or long payment terms. So that was the first time I was able to buy through long payment terms. Isang house and lot worth 5.8 million pesos.
Oh,
Mm.
wow.
At that time in Ayala
And the-
Ferndale. So kung hindi dun sa crisis na yon, walang ganun long terms no.
Yes.
So that's what we see today.
Yes. I think that was
fast forward lang ako.
yeah.
Madaming
I think,
discounts
Mike,
ngayon.
that was a time when interest rates were how much?
I forget
More
na
than
but
20
but
for the 15,
yeah,
almost 20%, more than 20%, in fact. So
yes,
that was a tumultuous period
period but
for the property
no,
market.
but there are opportunities
Exactly.
in
And
in those kinds of periods.
I think what I want to highlight here, Carlos, no, just to compare the two periods,
Mhm.
Asian financial versus, for example, the COVID-19 pandemic, right? When the POGOs were already entering the Philippine property market and they really drove prices and office lease rates in Metro Manila. I think what I want to highlight here is the fact that when you compare Asian financial crisis versus the COVID-19 pandemic, the supply of office and residential in Metro Manila at that time was still very low during the Asian financial crisis. That's why even if we saw some slowdown at that time, the impact was not as drastic compared to what we saw
Mhm.
at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic and then the POGO Exodus. Because right now, the supply of office and residential towers definitely increased substantially. And as a result, if you don't have the POGOs that previously drove demand for these offices and residential tower, definitely you'll see some correction. And we saw that, right? I remember at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, we were projecting that secondary prices of condominiums in Metro Manila would decline by 15%. We received a lot of flack for saying that, but we weren't actually referring to the pre-selling prices. Some, in fact, assumed that we were referring to pre-selling. No, because I think the pre-selling projects are still under the inventory of developers, so they are unlikely to drop the prices. But in the secondary market, wherein investors can make sacrificial sales,
Market forces na yan,
exactly,
Joey.
even drop prices below acquisition price, that was that's when we projected that the prices will likely drop by 15%. And we made that call. Well, even if you look at our data, in fact, prices dropped by between
More
15 to
than
20%, even more than
more than
Mike, right?
15%.
Yeah, so we received flack for that, but
Mm.
that was our initial estimate, and we were close to, really projecting the actual decline in prices in Metro Manila at that point.
During crisis, Joey, what do you think are the biggest lessons, no, that the industry or buyers,
Yeah.
sellers can learn from this
Yeah.
crisis
That's an
happened?
interesting question, Mike.
Oh.
But during periods of economic crisis, global health crisis problems, what have the developers learned first? It's important for developers to have recurring income, right? Because you're selling condominium, there will be dampened take up demand at the time. So residential sales will definitely be affected. I know a couple of developers, Mike, that were affected by the lack of demand for golf club shares at the height of the Asian financial crisis. So, one lesson that developers have learned during these times of economic crunch or health crisis is to have streams of recurring income. Why? Because if you don't have huge revenues from residential sales, you have, for example, the retail sector that can help prop up still your revenues. The office leasing, they may not expand as fast compared to how the office sector expanded at the height of the BPO demand in Metro Manila, say early 2000s. But again, that's still a very good source of recurring income, sustain your operations, and then even hotel, the leisure sector. This is a very good segment that we can really bank on. But it all boils down to having recurring income. I believe that's what developers have implemented. Don't just stick to major sales, for example, which can really give you one time, big time gains, right? in terms of major acquisitions or sales, but it's really that recurring income source. And having that recurring income have a greater share to your revenue mix, right, Mike? That's what we have learned. So that's very important. That's crucial for a lot of developers, especially during times of economic crunch. In fact, that is somehow applicable to our business, Mike. Colliers Philippines. We also have these segments. We have office brokerage, office leasing, so we get commission. We also have a business line that sells properties, so helps dispose properties of developers. So during times of economic crunch, those segments might, feel the pinch of an economic crisis. What other segment do we have? The property management, the facilities management, Mike, because if
Continuing yan,
exactly, so you have
titigil.
to continue managing a property, because if you don't do that, essentially you lose the value of that property. That's why, during times of economic crunch, that's one of the major sources of recurring income for Colliers Philippines. It's somehow applicable to what developers should do. Overall, it all boils down to having a good source of recurring income, and that source of recurring income contributing a greater part to your revenue mix overall.
I think no, it's no secret. Ayala Land
Yes,
recently, so a week, 2 weeks
exactly.
ago,
That's right.
announced that they're not refocusing, but retweaking,
Exactly. Yeah.
recalibrating into
Yes.
their recurring income
Exactly.
businesses
Yes.
in
So
the
that,
light
yeah.
of the slowdown.
Correct, Mike and Carlos. So that's important. I think that's, one of the lessons that they learned previously, right? So what's the focus of Ayala Land now? Of course, office leasing, right? We helped Ayala Land lease out the Axon building, the former People Support Ayala Corner Buendia. So that's a pretty significant source of recurring income, right? Office leasing revenues, hotel sector. That's very important because, you know, yes, we are seeing some economic pinch, but the tourism sector continues to grow.
Yeah.
And we believe that this is one segment that has tremendous prospect for further expansion. How many tourists did we attract back in 2025? 7 million when Thailand attracted 30 million. So imagine the potential. It's really tremendous. So not just that, as a recurring income, office leases, malls, even industrial, Mike, that's important. Especially when you look at Central and South Luzon. Industrial parks by Ayala Land, for example, really able to attract these major manufacturing players. In fact, the latest data from the Philippine Statistics Authority, majority, more than 50% of foreign investment pledges coming or likely to be cornered by Central Luzon. And of course, Ayala Land Logistics having a significant industrial footprint in the region, not mentioning its humongous industrial footprint in South Luzon. So really that is a potential driver of recurring income for this developer.
I also like to ask, kasi, would you say today's developers are stronger than who they were before these crises happened?
I would say so.
Uh-huh.
I think again that's one key lesson that they learned.
Mhm.
You have to diversify your portfolio mix, your revenue mix. Yes, you'd have residential sales, right? Because that's the aspiration of every Filipino, a Filipino working abroad. Diversify your source of residential revenues. How? You don't just build condos, of course. You even launch horizontal house and lot as well as lot only. What did I mention in my previous Inquirer columns and Philippine Star columns? House and lot is hot, right? And these residential buyers, OFWs, a Filipino professional, they're end users. They buy a house and lot, they live in it. That's why house and lot is not only hot, but these residential end users are redefining the residential plot, Mike, right? So I think that's a very important, and developers are implementing that. So you have condo, you have house and lot. What else do we have? Lot only, residential lot only. Why are these lot only projects attractive? If you are an astute investor, just like Mike here, you don't, if you already have a condo, you need to diversify, right? So you look for other product types. So you now invest in a lot only development, which has a huge potential for price appreciation. I'll give you an example, Mike. Previously, in my most recent international roadshow, I was invited by Ayala Land in Singapore, and a lot of deals were closed. One of the major deals, and what really stood out, was this lot only project for sale near Enara Township in Nuvali. And it was sold for 31 million pesos to an OFW in cash.
Wow.
So imagine that, right? So really, a lot of Filipinos have a lot of cash and are acquiring these properties. And again, we have seen some lot only developments that have recorded tremendous price appreciation. 15%, 18% on an annual basis. That's why if you are a wise investor and you want to really diversify your investment portfolio mix, don't just buy condo, you don't just buy house and lot, you also acquire a lot only. So you own the ground, you let the value compound.
Mhm.
That's what
Wow.
we're seeing for the lot only
Again, what's that?
developments.
Paano yan?
You
What?
for the lot only.
Yeah.
So you own the
On
ground,
the ground.
let the value compound.
Okay.
Right?
So we'll have that trademark.
Yes. So Carlos should
Yes.
better remember that. So that
Noted.
Carlos is still young, and he
Oh.
makes all these investments and
Mm.
markets his projects to his potential investors. That's what he will say.
As Ayala Land premier seller.
Yes.
Oh, of course.
Valid ba yung ano?
Very valid.
Have you
Very
been
valid.
selling during
Yes.
this
Thanks
time?
for validating.
Ah? Mga lot only nyo ba? Is
Yes.
it moving?
It is moving.
Yeah.
Can you
actually.
share some of your anecdotes without
Uh,
disclosing?
Well, a lot of our clients really just are taking advantage of the
Yes.
crisis because
Yeah.
they're very smart with their they want to store their wealth, so
Exactly.
they just get a plot of land and
Yung mga
wait for it
sale
to
mo
compound.
naman, specifics, wala ba?
Sorry?
Yung sale mo, mga
The,
sale mo for the
Sale.
past, ano.
Actually, I made I think around 4 sales so far this year,
Oh.
and all of them are lot only. So
Lot only.
there
Okay,
really
no?
is a demand for it.
Yeah, but
So,
that's a lot. But again,
uh,
it's really this investor mindset, right, Mike? Carlos, you buy now, you buy low, you sell high. Of course, if you're talking about Ayala Land premier lots, they're not relatively cheap, right? But relatively, you buy low, then you sell high. Why? Because you see a tremendous price appreciation potential. By the time you flip it,
mhm.
you've achieved a tremendous price increase already. And again, let's not forget, why do we see the potential of these lot only projects? Number one, infrastructure. Whether you go north or down south, you have all of these major infra projects that will be completed. North-South Commuter Railway, Cavite Laguna Expressway, MRT 7, Altaraza in
Mm.
Bulacan. So we believe that there's a lot of potential to unlock
Mm.
in these residential lot only developments. And also, if I may add, Mike and Carlos, if there is one demand that we saw being highlighted by the COVID-19 pandemic, it's a demand for greener, more open spaces. And I think you'd agree to this. You don't have to be a residential lot owner, end user to agree to this. Even for an ordinary Filipino living right now in his own house and lot unit, of course, you want a bigger space. A lot of Filipinos are working from home. And I know some developers that have seen a tremendous demand from virtual assistants because the VAs will be needing to carve out their own home office, Mike. So they have really been a major driver also of these house and lot developments, North Luzon, Central Luzon, and even South Luzon.
Good thing that you mentioned yung North-South Commuter
Yes.
Railway. I'm really bullish
yeah.
about that
Yep.
project.
Yeah.
When I went to Baguio and saw the actual rail ba yun? Yung
Yes.
train ba yun?
The planks,
the
right?
planks
That they
that's
already
they're actually
built.
actually
Yeah.
there.
And
Oo.
Mike, without being political about these infra projects, why are they crucial? Why are they important to the Philippine economy and property? Once you saw all those planks already built by JICA, because
Yeah.
that North-South Commuter Railway is being funded by JICA. Of course, even if we have a new president in 2028, and if the new president is from the other side of the political fence, he or she will unlikely pare down
Correct.
those major planks. He
Correct.
will, of course, continue
Mm.
those major infra projects. So somehow, These infra help isolate the economy and Philippine property to all these political bickerings that we're seeing right now.
So I totally agree with that, no, na despite of all the political
Yeah.
noise, conglomerates,
Yes.
the
Yeah.
astute investors
That's right.
continue to buy
Yes.
and
And it's
continue to move
yeah.
forward. Sila yung
Yeah.
mag-reap nung ano to eh. Sila
Exactly.
yung mag-reap ng benefits once all this
Yeah.
crisis is over. Eh.
And if I may add, Mike, that's why they are on a business as usual mode,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
Somehow these infra projects, the economic growth prospects are shielding us from all these global geopolitical and even domestic political crisis and bickering that we're seeing right now.
I like what you said, Joe, in a business as usual.
Exactly.
Because what you see in the comments, should I buy condo? Should I
Yeah.
migrate to
Yeah.
Spain or anywhere?
Yes.
I respect their decisions. But essentially, it's a time to take advantage of the
Yes.
situation through
Yes.
opportunities.
Yeah. And Mike, I get a lot of flack, and of course, I would have some TV interviews, and then when these media organizations post reels of my interviews, then I would say that now still a good time to invest in a condominium unit, buy a condo. Some commenters would say you're not making any sense. No, that's not true. Well, let me tell you, if you are an end user, an investor, you have different needs. For example, if you're selling to my family who's based in Pampanga, can you entice them to buy a condominium unit in Makati if they're not even working in Makati? Of course not. They'll probably buy another house and lot or lot only in Pampanga or nearby Tarlac and Bulacan. But it will be a very difficult sell if you offer them a condominium unit in Fort Bonifacio or Makati. It just doesn't make sense, right? But if you entice a family member of that, my family, another family member, for example, say my brother, if you entice my brother who, just for the sake of assumption here, is working in Quezon City, and if you entice him to buy a condominium unit in Quezon City, will he find value in that condo in Quezon City? Of course, because he's working in Quezon City. He doesn't want to travel to and from Quezon City, waste what, 1.5, 2 hours just to drive. And for him to be able to take advantage of that live, work, play, shop lifestyle. You have a different buyer, you have a different end user. They have different purposes, reasons why they are investing or renting. So that should be factored in also.
But if I may pick up on your
Yeah.
story about that person or that family
Yeah.
living in in Pampanga,
Yes.
buying something in let's say in Quezon City
Yes.
or Makati. So I think these developers, well, Rockwell for one, that came up to my mind na
Yeah.
kami pupunta sa Pampanga.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
That's
if Muhammad cannot go to the
yes.
mountains, the
Yes.
mountain will go
You move
to
the mountains
to
to Mohammed.
Mohammed, di ba?
Exactly. That's a
So
very good point,
I got
Mike.
excited with the Nepo
The Nepo Center.
Nepo Center, yung
And
Rockwell.
well,
They have a
interestingly, it
power
will
plant
have a
in
power plant mall. And from what I heard, Mike, the near completion of that power plant mall is in fact contributing to greater sales of their third tower,
Mhm.
Aurelio. So, very interesting developments. Imagine having a power plant mall outside of Metro Manila, being the first one. I think the second one will be in Bacolod, another power plant mall. So that will be very interesting. It will really be a game changer
Mm.
in Pampanga's retail landscape. And if I may add, Mike, that is also contributing to the further premiumization
Wow.
of that
Premiumization.
of Central Luzon, of Pampanga, Bulacan, Tarlac. You now see all these major developers, right? Rockwell, Ayala Land,
Short
of
story,
course.
ano lang when I saw that yung Rockwell in Pampanga,
Pampanga.
tas may mga condos,
Yes.
may mga condos na for sale. Since I cannot afford a condo in Rockwell, Makati, sabi ko mag-invest kaya ako dito na ano. It was I really considered that
Yeah.
well in playing my mind.
Yes.
But I know that they're doing something in Lipa in the future. Sabi ko baka
Yes.
doon na lang south ako eh. But
Or,
can you imagine
if I-
I'm just
yeah.
one of the
Exactly. Yeah.
many people who
Yeah.
thought about that in
Yeah.
investing. So may multiplier
yeah.
effect.
But to piggyback on what you mentioned, Mike, the developers now developing near their buyers and renters in the provinces. Again, when you want to diversify, you may want to opt for a residential lot only by Ayala in Angeles City, right? Or by Rockwell in Bulacan, or another Rockwell in Batangas. So you now see a lot of options right now being offered by developers. That's why, I don't understand the comments. Well, of course, I understand that they're not from the real estate sector. And, it will probably take them, some explanation, some discussing before they really fully understand why now still a good time to invest.
I think that's your advocacy or
Of,
my advocacy also, to
yes,
share things how we see it
of
through a different
course.
lens. Not
Yes.
because na you're
Yeah.
selling, you're a
Right.
broker, ganito. But you have
Again,
to see past through that and do
yes.
your own research. If
Exactly. You
it's valid.
mentioned, seeing past through that. The problem is, some of these netizens and commenters would, have a very myopic stance on what we say, right? Without fully understanding other factors.
Mm.
So that's very important also.
I'm bullish, Joey, about yung I featured in a video it's a YouTube ko. No? It's macro Manila. No?
Yes.
So it's including the north,
The nearby.
from New Clark City, which is Tarlac, Pampanga, Bulacan, may ano na Subic kunya,
Yes.
may Subic konte, then Metro Manila, going past Cavite,
Oh,
Laguna,
really?
Batangas, to even Quezon, no. So I
Really a
think
lot of
there's a
potential.
big ano yan, big payan yung macro Manila, I call it.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's so much I think for the
Yes.
next 10, 20, 30 years for it to be growing.
Yes.
Natural suburbanization yan. They're
Yeah.
moving outside Metro
Yes.
Manila.
And if I may add, Mike, no, that is also supported by two important government-led initiatives. One is decentralization, because you want to spur economic activities, business activities outside of Metro Manila. So you now create new economic centers. You create what? A Nepo center, right? You create an Ayala Township, Alviera in Porac.
Mm.
You create Altaraza in Bulacan, or other developer, for example, Mega World, Northwind Global City
Yeah.
in Bulacan.
Mm.
So you now have these new economic corridors. For example, Cavite, you have Evo City, Novali, you have Vermosa, right, south of Luzon. So you now create new economic centers so that people will not only have to, travel all the way to Metro Manila. Within those regions and provinces, you create economic hubs that will be self-sustaining, generating a lot of employment opportunities. So you now have a more decentralized economic system and not just rely and hinge solely on Metro Manila. So that's one. Another is, of course, infrastructure implementation. Again, North-South Commuter Railway. Imagine it will be cutting travel time from Clark to Calamba to about an hour and a half from the previous three, or more
Or
than
more. Yeah.
more hours, right? So infrastructure implementation and decentralization will be crucial in really sustaining the property market's growth trajectory.
And these are not original concepts by
No,
no yung sa Malaysia, yung
exactly.
Putrajaya,
Yes,
sa
yes,
baba,
right?
in other
Yeah.
areas as well.
Make the building an airport in the suburban area, far from the city center, right? But it is still sustainable,
Correct.
right? Those economic centers are very much sustainable.
Ako sa young boy, no, 80s yata, 90s, wala pa kayo nun. So we traveled to Japan,
Yes.
Narita Airport.
Mm.
So ang Narita pala, ang layo pala sa downtown Tokyo. I was saying, ba't ang layo nito? Unlike, well, they were ahead of their time.
Mm.
Hong Kong, the new Hong Kong airport, although they have a train, it's really far from the main downtown. Well, Hong Kong City, Hong Kong downtown, Chimchatsui or Kowloon, the airport. So these are not new concepts.
Yes.
Yan.
Yes. And in fact, I think Indonesia is planning that, Mike, right?
Meron
So
din yan.
creating a new capital, a new economic center, because I think Jakarta is being flooded, persistently. So they need to create a new economic center outside, far from the current one.
Mhm.
So very interesting development. So in fact, we all just need to look at these countries, our neighbors, and how we can, really take advantage. In fact, transit-oriented developments are not new, but obviously the Philippines is somehow delayed in terms of maximizing all these infra developments and building more transit-oriented
Mm.
projects. Hopefully, this becomes our model
Mm.
moving forward.
Yung north-south, going back to the north-south
Mm.
commuter railway, no, from ano yan, no? So from Tarlac naman, meron ba? New
Yes.
Clark City
New Clark
na
City.
to Clark Airport,
Yes.
then to Bulacan,
Yes.
through Metro Manila,
Mm.
hanggang
And then down
Calamba,
south. Calamba is
south,
the last stop for now. But I think there
Tapos may
even
connecting din eh.
plans
May
to,
mga
yes,
connecting, ano, no.
to
So,
further expand it down south.
so I see workers, no, they
Yes.
may be working in Metro Manila, but they live in
Province.
in the province,
Exactly.
Go
Bulacan,
home
ano.
same
So,
day. Yeah.
Oh,
they no longer have to, live or rent here in Metro Manila.
ano.
Just take the north-south commuter railway, the subway, of course.
Oh, yeah.
Metro Manila subway. So imagine decongesting Metro Manila. So all these decentralization, infrastructure thrusts are really helping decongest Metro Manila and again create
Mm.
value outside of the capital region. Because if you, for example, look at the concept of increasing growth prospects, right? If you already have a high base, the potential for further increases of economic output, because you already have a high base, will be very marginal, will be very small. But if you create a new economic center coming from a low base, that will have, substantial, tremendous potential in terms of capital appreciation or creation of new businesses and capital. So interesting to see all these developments right now within and outside Metro Manila, especially outside
Mm.
of Metro Manila.
Yes, Joey, you know what excites me? No? Medyo low sa radar pa
Yes.
siya, no? But I think it's going to be big. Yung Luzon Economic Corridor.
Yes.
So
yes.
it's by by the Philippines, Japan, and the United
Yes.
States. Pinaprioritize yan. May
That's
mga
right.
meetings in Washington and in Japan and
Yeah.
some other areas. Yung Luzon Economic Corridor, I think it's about the yung mga microchip yan eh. May geopolitical implications
Yes.
yan eh.
Yes.
They're launching something in Clark na eh.
Mm.
In Clark to start everything, no.
Yeah.
So may railway raw yan from Subic to Clark,
Yeah.
Metro Manila, then Batangas
Yeah.
Port.
Well, because
So,
after all, Mike, that's already a very good economic hub that you capture, right? Subic. I think, in fact, the previous plans of previous administrations was even how to make sure that that region is self-sustaining. Because that central Luzon region, you have Bulacan, you have Tarlac, so you have the rice fields, right? And then you have a potential tourism ecozone in Aurora, right? And then, of course, you have Pampanga. I think that Central Luzon has really transformed. Previously, it's about rice fields. Now we're talking about property yields,
wow.
right, Mike? So, interesting developments that we're seeing.
So yung fast talk natin.
Oh, okay,
fast
I like
talk
that.
natin, oo.
Interesting.
So
Okay.
interesting na
Bring it on.
So one I like our guest. I like
Yes.
Joe. Bring it on.
Bring it on.
hindi shocked or anything.
So
Okay,
I will only
reply with one
just one
word.
No explanation,
No
right?
explanation.
Okay.
No.
Bring it on. Okay.
Okay, sige. Let's start.
Okay.
No? Metro Manila or suburb?
Suburb.
North or south?
North.
Pampanga or Laguna?
Pampanga, Kapampangan.
Condo or house?
House.
Space or convenience?
Convenience.
Emerging area you're watching closely?
Pampanga.
Top 3 developers in your book?
Ayala, Rockwell, Robinsons.
Okay. Okay. Pampanga in one word.
Delicious.
Okay.
Sisig tayo. Ano? New Valley in one word.
Competitive.
Lights on or lights off?
Well, we need to keep lights on for the Philippine property.
Yun.
Wow. What a way. What a way to end.
What a way to end. One more.
Wow.
Biggest opportunity today.
Biggest opportunity outside of Metro Manila.
Okay.
Invest in lot-only projects outside of Metro Manila.
Most underrated growth corridor.
I would say the northern Mindanao region.
Northern.
But I think that has a lot of potential, Mike.
So,
Imagine you have an American base there.
let's expound on that.
Yeah.
Tapos na tayo dun sa,
Yeah.
ano, sa
Yes.
Fast talk.
fast talk.
But-
I'm
Yeah, you
interested
have an
in that.
American base there. Cagayan de Oro is a growing business location. If I may share an anecdote, previously we have a developer there, a landlord, and they were having a difficult time leasing out their office space. And then even at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, when the Philippine economy was recovering, they were able to lease out their entire office building. You have Dusit Princess, a lot of new foreign hotel brands in northern Mindanao. Of course, you have PV Deck. So that's again an industrial location. So it's firing from all cylinders, Mike. Office,
Wow, I like that. Firing on
Yeah.
all cylinders.
Exactly. Office, residential, industrial, leisure, right? Even retail. See, the SM in Cagayan de Oro is a very big mall and is well designed. So a lot of potential in Cagayan de Oro. Of course, you also have your Seda and Ayala malls in Cagayan de Oro, right? So
Yeah.
interesting corridor, that northern Mindanao region.
Okay, Joey,
Mm.
before we end, we talked about crisis, opportunities, infrastructure, growth corridors, cities, and the future. Beyond all that, I want to ask something more personal. Yan.
Bring it on.
You have spent years studying cycles.
Yeah.
You've seen optimism, you've seen fear, booms, busts, downturns.
Yeah.
After all these years, what have crises taught you about life?
I think all these challenges, crises that we experience enable us to become more pliant, to become stronger. You know, we become more resilient when we go through all these challenges in life. And just like the Philippine property, Mike, it has ups and downs. We all have ups and downs in our lives. In fact, I would even add that the Philippine property is highly cyclical. Our lives are also cyclical, right? I mean, we go through stages. There are moments when we feel down. There are times when we, lift our spirits because, we need to do this not just for ourselves, but also for the people around us, our families, our loved ones. And, just like the Philippine property market, it benefits not just the developers, but also all of us, stakeholders in this Philippine property market. You may be an investor, a buyer, an end user, or someone who just wants to finally own a residential unit. But overall, what all these challenges teach us is to become stronger and to continue dreaming and aspiring for that ultimate goal of ours.
Love that reply, no? Per extend nating konti.
Yes.
Imagine Carlos' generation.
Okay.
25 years, sweet spot.
25 years,
They're
yes.
good friends. No?
Representative of
Oh,
the Philippine
exactly.
population, si Carlos.
They're entering adulthood in a world that feels uncertain
Okay.
because of all these noises and everything else. No? If you can leave them with one lesson you've learned from studying cycles, na sinabi mo, markets and life, what would it be?
Mike, when you talk about the Philippine property market, what key consideration do you have when you're investing? 3 words I have for you: location, location, location. And being someone from the research department of Colliers Philippines and being the head of that unit, what do you need to do to be able to go through all these challenges and overcome all these crises that we will be experiencing? Research, research, research. That is very important. Whether you are acquiring a property for investment or for end use, that's what we say. Why? Right now, what do we have? We have a lot of unsold condominium units. So you should do your own research. There are developers offering attractive payment terms, lease to own. You have a lot of options right now. So what will really set you apart is your ability to do an environmental scan and do your own research. That is very important. I'm someone who has been doing research since joining the labor force in 2007, and I think that what I have achieved so far and what I am now, I attribute it to my being a researcher.
Mm.
So that's one key advice that I have
Mhm.
for Carlos.
Thank you. Thank you.
Very AIM yung environmental scan.
Of course. Of course.
With that,
And
anything else, Carlos?
yeah, it's really nice
Yeah.
learning all these things
Yeah.
from
Yeah. Well, I
the
can,
best.
Carlos and Mike, just to perhaps summarize
Yeah.
what we have discussed here. I think the Philippine property market, of course, we can't deny the fact that it is experiencing some headwinds. But as it is going through and experiencing some headwinds, of course, there are tailwinds, the positives. And I mentioned that earlier. The office sector, Metro Manila, vacancy is about 19%. But when you go to other key locations, especially on a more micro level, Makati CBD, Fort Bonifacio, Ortigas Center, vacancy is 9 to 11%. Of course, there are some submarkets, such as the Bay Area, that are seeing some elevated vacancies. But what's the opportunity? In fact, you can still haggle. If you're a tenant, you can haggle for much lower lease rates. If you are a developer, now is a good time to negotiate with the current tenants that you have so that you can be assured that they'll be staying in your office space for the long haul. Residential, again, condominium segment, it will take about 7 years to fully sell the unsold condo inventory. They're ready for occupancy units. But there are a lot of opportunities, again, outside of Metro Manila. I'm talking about Pampanga, of course, my favorite province, Bulacan, Tarlac, Cavite, Laguna, Batangas, Cebu, Bacolod, Iloilo. While there are some challenges in the Metro Manila condo market, when you look at these certain locations, South Luzon, Central Luzon, Central Visayas, the take up for horizontal, meaning house and lot only, is more than 90%, Mike. So meaning if there are 100 house and lot only projects actively marketed in these regions, 95 are sold already.
Oh.
Meaning at the very least they have reservation payment. So that's a very good. And again, let me emphasize this, house and lot is hot. And the end users are redefining the resi plot. Why do you need to buy a lot only? Because you need to own the ground and let the value compound.
Wow.
Right? Now, so office, residential, retail. The retail sector, of course, very aggressive still. The vacancy in the retail sector is about 10%, Mike.
Mm.
But what do we see right now? Developers have been limiting their completion of new mall space because it's a more tempered market right now. But what do you see? Anco, IKEA, Muji. Look at
All
Muji
coming
in
in.
Glorieta, 3 floors, right? Occupying. Flying Tiger, Copenhagen. And we believe that there's a lot of opportunities also for home furnishing companies because you have more than 70,000 condo units vacant yet to be sold. Imagine once those are completed, the buyers will be needing home furnishing for their condo units. So our advice for mall developers, you need to continue refreshing your retail space. Fuel prices are increasing. You have to make sure that if your customers go to your mall and spend money on gas, they'll be able to stay there longer, spend more. But again, that curation of retail space is very important. As we always say, Mike, at Colliers, you need to innovate, otherwise you will evaporate.
Wow.
So that's what we always say, the retailers and the mall developers. The hotel sector is still growing. About 40% of new hotel brands that will be opening in Metro Manila over the next 3 years will have foreign brands. Mandarin, Oriental, right, along Ayala Avenue. And then you have still the likes of Citadines, Ascot. We have the first Radisson Red right now in Cebu, Dusit Princess. So there's a lot of opportunities still. One key segment for the leisure sector that developers should maximize, the MICE segment. Because admittedly, there will be some concerns with the discretionary spending patterns of Filipinos because again, fuel prices increasing, skimping on discretionary retail, meaning sticking to the basics. So, if you entice more businesses to hold events, then eventually billet their executives within your hotel rooms, that will be a major driver of your hotel operations and revenues. Industrial sector remains strong, and again, of course, Ayala Land and other developers are really aggressively expanding their industrial presence. In Central Luzon, there will be more than 900 hectares of new industrial space. In South Luzon, only about 230,000 hectares. 230 hectares. What does that mean? South Luzon's new industrial supply will only be about a quarter of the new supply in Central Luzon. So more and more companies will be gravitating towards the Central Luzon region. That's why it will no longer be surprising to see all these industrial players really redefining um, that Central Luzon economic corridor, electric vehicle manufacturers,
Oh.
fiber cement, other even Hollywood post-production facilities are now in New Clark City. And with all these infrastructure projects being implemented, we believe that there will be further development of the Central Luzon growth corridor. We have seen its transformation from rice fields. Now we're prioritizing property yields. So, a lot of opportunities still. There will be challenges, there will be headwinds, but there are positives and there are tailwinds that we see. And overall, what we have right now are opportunities amidst all these uncertainties.
Naka, Joey, thank you. No, on that
Of
note,
course.
I think after what you've said, this deserves a part two. Dahil,
Of course.
we're, as Joseph Estrada would say, we're just it's just the tip of the ice cream. We just scratched the
Okay.
tip of
Yes.
tip of
We're
the
barely,
iceberg.
yes. I think, yeah. Sorry, Mike.
Pinaparap up na tayo.
I know I already concluded, but again, this one important
Sige,
note for the
sige,
Philippine
sige.
property. Prices are increasing, right, for property. But we're barely scratching the surface. Because when you compare the Philippine prices versus other regional prices, Asia, Southeast Asia, Asia Pacific, we're still part of that bottom half. So imagine if you buy now, the potential for price appreciation.
Great. Awesome. Thank you again.
Thank you, Sir Joey.
On behalf of Carlos and,
Of
myself,
course,
I'd like
Carlos. I
to,
just see Carlos
to
again.
thank
Of course,
you
you,
for,
Mike. Yes.
for being with us
Of
today.
course, no problem.
Thank you,
So
Joey.
ulitin. Yeah, thank you.
I think one of the biggest lessons from today's conversation is that uncertainty is not new. Every generation experiences moments when the future feels unclear. The Asian financial crisis, the global financial crisis, the pandemic, and another period of adjustment and recalibration within the real estate market. Yet history also reminds us that periods of uncertainty often become periods of preparation. Preparation for new infrastructure, preparation for new industries, preparation for new growth corridors, preparation for opportunities. They may not be obvious while uncertainty dominates the headlines. What we heard today wasn't blind optimism. It wasn't fear either. It was perspective. A reminder that markets move in cycles, that communities continue to evolve, that economies adapt, and that the Philippines continues to build.
One thing that stood out to me today is that real estate isn't simply about buying low and selling high. It's really about understanding where people want to live, work, raise families, and build their futures. The conversation about North and South wasn't really about choosing one over the other. It was about recognizing that different regions can thrive for different reasons. And as infrastructure improves, those connections become more meaningful. Whether it's Clark, Pampanga, Bulacan, Nuvali, Laguna, Cavite, or the many emerging growth centers across the country, the bigger story may actually be how all of these places are becoming increasingly connected, and how that connectivity creates new possibilities for future generations.
Perhaps the biggest takeaway is that while fear often dominates the headlines, progress tends to happen quietly. One road at a time, one railway at a time, one airport at a time, one estate at a time, one community at a time. And while no one can predict the future perfectly, history suggests that the disciplined, patient, and discerning often position themselves thoughtfully during uncertain periods, not recklessly, not emotionally, but thoughtfully.
And maybe that's ultimately what this podcast is about. Not trying to predict the future, but learning how to think about it. Learning from people who have studied cycles, trends, communities, and human behavior for decades, and hopefully helping all of us make better decisions, not just in real estate, but also in life. Because where we choose to live, work, invest, and spend our time ultimately shapes the kind of life we create.
Joey, thank you for sharing us your insights, perspective, and wisdom with us today. And to everyone watching, thank you for spending your time with us.